Most superstar athletes celebrate success the same way. A new mansion in Miami, a fleet of luxury cars, designer watches worth more than most families make in a year, private jets, champagne parties. That is the image people expect after a major championship, especially after winning the biggest match of your life in front of millions of viewers worldwide. But according to people close to Alex Ila, what happened after the 2026 US Open was completely different. Quiet, private, almost impossible to believe at first. Because while the sports world was still celebrating her historic victory, Ila reportedly made a decision that stunned even members of her own inner circle. Instead of immediately planning luxury purchases or endorsement celebrations, she quietly donated $5 million to a children's charity initiative connected to education, healthcare, and sports access for underprivileged families. No cameras, no massive press conference, no social media campaign announcing her generosity. Just a donation made quietly behind the scenes with one condition attached: keep the focus on the children, not on her. And now that the story has finally surfaced months later, fans across the tennis world are reacting with the same question. Who does that at 21 years old? New York City, September 2026. Arthur Ashe Stadium. More than 23,000 people packed into the largest tennis arena in the world watching what had already become one of the defining matches of the year. Ila against the world number one. A brutal three-set final that stretched both players physically and emotionally. The rallies were exhausting. The pressure was suffocating. Every game felt like it carried the weight of history. By the final set, the crowd inside the stadium looked emotionally drained just from watching the battle unfold. Ila had spent nearly 3 hours fighting through power, nerves, momentum swings, and the pressure of representing an entire country on one of the biggest stages in sports. Then came championship point. One final rally. One final exchange from the baseline. The world number one pushed a forehand deep. Ila slid across the hard court, redirected the ball cross-court, and suddenly the return floated long. Match over. For a split second, the stadium froze. Then the noise exploded. Ila collapsed to the court, covering her face, as tears poured out instantly. Not frustration. Not relief alone. These were the tears of someone who had spent years grinding through junior tournaments, academy practices, injuries, travel, pressure, and doubt for one impossible dream. In that moment, she became the first Filipino player ever to win multiple Grand Slam singles titles. And the significance of that achievement hit everyone at once. The crowd rose immediately into a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Fans waved Philippine flags from every corner of Arthur Ashe Stadium. Some people were crying in the stands. Others simply stood there clapping, understanding they had witnessed something historic. Commentators began openly discussing whether Ila had just become the most important athlete in modern Philippine sports history. When she finally stood up, her emotions were still overwhelming her. She waved shakily toward the audience. She embraced her opponent at the net with respect. Then she slowly made her way toward the players' box where the people closest to her were waiting. Her father looked emotional. Her coaching team looked stunned. Childhood friends who had known her long before the spotlight were crying openly. One by one, she hugged every person who helped carry her through the journey. Then came the trophy ceremony. Standing alone at center court under the bright New York lights, Ila lifted the US Open trophy into the air as flashes exploded throughout the stadium. The image instantly became iconic. A 21-year-old Filipina standing on the biggest stage in tennis, holding one of the sport's most prestigious prizes while millions watched around the world. Sports networks replayed the moment for days. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling may have defined her even more than the victory itself. According to reports that later emerged from people connected to the charity organization, Ila had been discussing the donation privately for months before the tournament even began. Sources claim she became increasingly affected by stories involving children who lacked access to healthcare, education, and organized sports opportunities across poorer communities in Southeast Asia. The deeper her own success grew, the more she reportedly felt pressure to create opportunities for kids who would never otherwise have access to the resources she received through elite training. That context changes everything about the donation, because this was not simply an athlete giving away money after suddenly becoming wealthy. This appeared to be someone thinking carefully about legacy while still at the beginning of her career. That is what shocked so many people once the story became public. Athletes often talk about giving back later in life, after retirement, after endorsements, after years of success. Hila reportedly acted immediately after the biggest victory of her career. And fans connected with that emotionally because it matched the public image she had quietly built during her rise. Humble, focused, calm under pressure. Even as global attention exploded around her, she rarely projected the celebrity arrogance often associated with young sports stars. Coaches, reporters, and fellow players frequently described her as grounded and unusually mature for her age. The donations suddenly reinforced everything people already suspected about her character. Within days of the story breaking, reactions flooded social media. Some fans called it one of the most selfless gestures they had seen from a young athlete in years. Others pointed out that in an era where celebrity branding often feels carefully manufactured, Hila's decision stood out precisely because nobody initially knew about it. There had been no attempt to turn the act into publicity. And perhaps that is why the story hit so hard around the world. Because in modern sports, people are used to greatness on the court. They are used to trophies, endorsements, and headlines. What they are not used to is seeing a young global superstar quietly walk away from the biggest moment of her life and immediately think about children she had never met. The cameras flashed nonstop as Alex Hila stood at center court holding the U.S. Open trophy above her head. That image spread across the world within minutes. Sports networks replayed it for hours. Newspapers called it one of the biggest moments in Philippine sports history. Social media exploded with celebrations from fans who watched a 21-year-old become a global superstar in real time. But while the world focused on the trophy presentation, almost nobody knew what was already happening quietly behind the scenes. Because according to people familiar with the situation, Hila made a decision in private that stunned even her own financial team. Winning the U.S. Open reportedly brought in nearly $6 million when everything was included. Prize money alone approached $4 million, and that did not even count endorsement bonuses, sponsorship incentives, media appearances, and commercial opportunities triggered by a Grand Slam victory. For most athletes, that kind of financial breakthrough changes everything overnight. Luxury real estate, sports cars, high-end fashion deals, private investments. The lifestyle usually becomes part of the story almost immediately. But Hila reportedly had a completely different conversation in mind. Instead of discussing purchases, she quietly contacted her financial advisor with a request nobody expected. She reportedly said she wanted to donate $5 million to a children's charity organization. Not later in her career. Not after retirement. Immediately. According to sources close to the situation, the advisor initially believed she was speaking emotionally in the aftermath of a major victory. $5 million is not a symbolic celebrity donation. That is life-changing institutional money, even for major nonprofit organizations. The advisor reportedly asked her multiple times whether she understood how large the amount really was. Her response was simple. She allegedly said she already had everything she needed, while millions of children around the world had almost nothing. That answer reportedly changed the entire tone of the conversation. The search then began quietly behind closed doors. Hila reportedly wanted an organization focused specifically on children facing poverty, homelessness, and educational hardship. She did not want a glamorous celebrity partnership or a highly publicized charity gala. She wanted direct impact. Eventually, attention turned toward Cradles to Crayons, a nonprofit based in Boston known for providing homeless and low-income children with clothes, school supplies, shoes, hygiene kits, and basic daily necessities many families struggle to afford. What happened next shocked even people working inside the organization. At the time, Cradles to Crayons reportedly operated on an annual budget of roughly $3 million. Hila's donation would not simply support the charity. It would completely transform its scale overnight. Staff members reportedly struggled to process the number when they first heard it. For perspective, many nonprofit organizations spend years fundraising for grants that are only a fraction of that size. A single donation exceeding an organization's yearly operating budget is extraordinarily rare, especially from an athlete barely old enough to legally drink in the United States. And perhaps the most surprising part was how quietly everything happened. There were no photographers documenting the transfer. No major announcement campaign. No emotional interview circuit explaining her generosity on television. In fact, according to reports, the public only learned about the donation weeks later after internal discussions within charity circles began leaking to journalists. Even then, Hila reportedly resisted turning the story into a publicity event. That silence may be why the reaction became so emotional once people discovered what happened. In today's sports world, fans are accustomed to highly managed celebrity branding. Charity work is often announced through coordinated press releases, sponsored campaigns, and carefully staged photo opportunities. But this story felt different because it reportedly happened without any attempt to generate attention. The act itself came first. Public recognition came later. Sports commentators immediately began comparing the gesture to some of the most respected acts of philanthropy by modern athletes. But many pointed out one critical difference. Most major sports philanthropy comes later in life after years of wealth accumulation. Hila was reportedly making this decision at the very beginning of her superstar career, immediately after the biggest victory she had ever achieved. The story also deepened the emotional connection fans already felt toward her. Throughout her rise, Hila had built a reputation for humility, discipline, and emotional maturity far beyond her age. Coaches regularly praised her focus. Fellow players described her as grounded. Reporters covering her breakthrough season repeatedly noted how calm she remained despite growing fame and pressure. The donations suddenly reinforced the image many people already had of her, not just as an elite athlete, but as someone thinking about purpose beyond trophies. And the timing mattered too. Around the world, conversations about wealth inequality, homelessness, and struggling families had become increasingly intense. Millions of parents were dealing with rising living costs, school expenses, and economic uncertainty. Against that backdrop, the image of a young sports star choosing children in shelters over luxury purchases hit people emotionally in a way few expected. Within days, reactions flooded television, radio shows, podcasts, and social media. Some fans called it the most inspiring sports story of the year. Others said the donation revealed more about Hila's character than any trophy ever could. Even critics who normally dismiss celebrity philanthropy admitted this felt unusually genuine because there appeared to be no effort to profit from the attention. And perhaps that is why the story spread so quickly once it became public. People were not simply reacting to the size of the donation. They were reacting to the idea behind it. A young athlete standing at the peak of fame, wealth, and global recognition looked at millions of dollars and reportedly decided the most important thing she could do with it was help children she would probably never meet.